So guys, again, I appreciate you joining me today. As most know that are on the line, I typically do most of our webinars. My name is Chris Montgomery. I'm the Director of Sales here with ThrottleNet. I've been with the organization now for about 10 years. It'll be 10 years come September. Have seen a lot over that time, obviously, seen a lot of different networks, environments, and a lot of the things we're going to discuss today. And some of the different things that I see when I'm out there and I do assessments and review these assessment reports and what the findings happen to be. So in addition to myself, I also have George Rosenthal on the line. He's going to be reviewing our Q&A section for any questions that come in through our conversation today. If for some reason we cannot get you an answer immediately for whatever reason, of course, we will then circle back with any users that had to have questions we couldn't answer with an answer after we speak with one of our team members here internally if it requires us doing so. So in getting things kicked off, I just wanted to start off with a poll question. Poll question is pretty straightforward. Who knows what Active Directory is? So I'm going to throw this poll out here. I'll let this run for about 30 seconds or so. I don't think it's going to require much, but if you guys could hit me up and let me know if you know what Active Directory is, that'd be great, because I'm always curious if folks know what role it plays in the organization and how it affects their business overall. So based on what I've seen thus far, it looks to me like we have quite a few that really just don't know what it is. So I'm glad that you joined us this morning. By the time we're finished today, I have a feeling you're going to know everything and then some that you need to know about Active Directory and whatever risks it might pose to your organization as a whole. So thank you for giving me those answers. I'm going to go ahead and end our poll, and we're going to get kicked off here this morning. We'll have another poll question here later in our discussion as we go on. So in getting things started, forgive me here as I move my mouse around. There we go. What are we covering today? Well, we know what we're covering today. We're covering Active Directory. Not a heck of an agenda when it comes to overall. I could bullet point this thing out, but we're going to talk all things Active Directory this morning and get into some details around what Active Directory is, what it does, what it means to your business, what the vulnerabilities are, what you guys need to be doing and thinking ahead about. We're going to cover all of that today, and then we're going to wrap up. We're just talking about how we help organizations to address their Active Directory and domain needs. So we'll wrap up on that note, and then if we have any questions that we need to answer, of course, we'll address those as we can going forward. So in getting started here today, why are we having the conversation in the first place? Okay, well, in large part, it's because of the poll question that I just asked and the fact that a lot of folks don't even know what Active Directory is and what role it plays within the organization. For those that do know what Active Directory is, Active Directory, otherwise known as AD, so you kind of hear me throwing back and forth the acronym versus Active Directory as an actual term. The business outages or Active Directory has serious business impact whenever it goes down. And when I talk in terms of what it does here in a few minutes, it's going to make a lot of sense to you as to why that would have such an impact on your organization overall. Essentially, in this survey, which was done by Semperis last year, almost every single respondent they issued the questionnaire out to, 97%, said that Active Directory is mission critical to their business, and 84% said that an Active Directory outage would be significant or catastrophic to the business. In addition, Active Directory recovery failure rate is incredibly high. 71% of respondents were only somewhat confident on their ability to recover from an Active Directory failure to new service in a timely fashion, and only 3% were extremely confident. Largely, that's because in a lot of cases, there's really no process in place to address that in the event it were to occur. A third of the organizations, 33%, had a cyber disaster recovery, Active Directory cyber disaster recovery plan in place, but they never tested it. So they've taken the time to put it together, but they've never actually put it in practice to see how well it works and if it's going to work the way that it should in the event of a failure. And then 21% have no plan in place at all. And out of that entire poll, only 15% have ever tested it within the last 6 months to ensure that if Active Directory failed, they'd be able to recover from it in a timely fashion and get themselves back up and operational. So what exactly is Active Directory? Well, the official definition of it is it helps you organize your company's users, computers, and more, your IT admin. If you're a client of ours, we would be that person, or if you have an internal IT person on the line. They use Active Directory to organize your company's hierarchy and computers and where they belong on the network, applying policies, profile pictures, all that good stuff. All of that stuff happens through Active Directory services. We have the Azure Active Directory logo up here because we'll talk as we get into this further about where you can host Active Directory and how that works. So in reality, though, what Active Directory is and what it does is that it is basically the root of everything. Okay, so in a nutshell, you have two different ways that a network can actually operate. Okay, you have one where it's in a work group, and in a work group environment, all of the machines are basically kind of daisy chained together. So they're not all tied to one central location. If you have to make any changes, you have to apply policies, you have to deploy agents or anything along those lines across the entire network. In a work group, you have to go to each individual workstation or device to apply those things. However, if you have a domain environment with Active Directory services in place, now all those machines are tying back to one centralized location, allowing you to administer and be able to push updates, patches, and agents, and antivirus solutions and policies across the entire network from one centralized location. In this case, the domain, which is usually going to reside on a server, along with the Active Directory services that are in place. Now, where can Active Directory be housed? Okay, well, as I mentioned a moment ago, of course, you can have Active Directory, like a lot of our clients do, on their server. So whenever we put in place a server, we build out a domain and we turn it into a domain controller, meaning that basically everything that is within that domain can be controlled by that domain controller. And in this case, then we go to Active Directory to add all of our users, to add all of our workstations, and to apply policies and otherwise. That said, we can house that in a couple of different places, actually 3 different places. One location is what I already described. You can have it housed on a local server infrastructure, as a lot of our clients do right now. However, through Azure Active Directory services, you can also have it hosted through Azure and have a hosted Active Directory and domain controller. Or you can leverage Active Directory Sync from Azure, in which case you would have it in both places. Essentially, you would have it syncing back and forth using Microsoft 365 in some cases, as well as that local server infrastructure and the Azure Active Directory service, and ultimately syncing that information up and down as needed and as new users and new policies and otherwise are applied. So again, these days it doesn't require a local server infrastructure to have Active Directory. You can actually run it in a fully hosted environment or a combination of the two. As we move on, how does Active Directory benefit your business? Well, first of all, it allows you to have administrative control. So again, if you've got everything running up into one centralized location, Active Directory is ultimately controlling all of those machines and all of those users and the respective policies associated with those users or groups of users. That is all being handled by Active Directory. It also allows for central storage of all of your information, okay, files and otherwise. So, for example, the way that ThrottleNet does backups, and we'll touch on this on the next slide, so we may as well go there. But the way that we do backups is we do a file and folder redirect. So we put in place a backup solution, and then from there, we're backing up the server, an image-based backup, so the operating system, all patches, updates, files, folders, and otherwise. But at the desktop level for all the users, we do a file and folder redirect so that when they save in their My Documents file, that is then going to flow up to the server level. It's where it's actually housed. The user doesn't know any different. And at the end of the day, whenever the backup occurs, now it's backing up not only the operating system, everything that's housed on that server, the domain controller, and Active Directory, but it's also backing up all of those users' My Documents. So again, given that centralized location, it makes it much more simplistic and efficient to do backups that way, as opposed to each individual device. We're only backing up the server, and the devices are just kind of on their own. So again, another benefit of Active Directory in a domain environment. And then once we have Active Directory in place, it simplifies the login process. We can apply things like multi-factor authentication through Active Directory, single sign-on. All of that stuff is managed through Active Directory, resulting in improved security. So again, security is top of mind these days, especially, I don't know what happened after 2020, but when we got into 2021, that is the conversation that we are having day in and day out. The clients that I'm talking to these days, their number one concern is security and protecting their network and ensuring that their users are protected and that they, in fact, have the most comprehensive protocols in place to ensure that the network is secure as possible. So again, Active Directory allows for that to happen. And the end result of all of this is it helps to reduce costs. Why? Because in the example I gave a moment ago of a work group versus a domained environment with Active Directory services in place, With the work group, if I wanted to install an antivirus, I'd have to walk to each individual workstation, which is going to obviously take a heck of a lot more time than if I just went back in the server room, or for that matter, remoted into the server from our location here in Sunset Hills and applied it from there. So again, now we're going to one centralized location and essentially applying patches and updates and deploying, as well as collecting information of all the machines, and all that is flowing and traversing back and forth through Active Directory services. And as I said, the end result is then reducing costs because it's reducing the amount of time investment to deploy services and policies, permissions, and otherwise. So what are the security benefits of Active Directory? So again, since it serves as a single point for us to go into and be able to apply permissions, policies, and otherwise to the different groupings contained within Active Directory itself, that is how we're able to provide better security by leveraging these services as opposed to a work group where everything is somewhat out there on its own. But the reason that we're really having the conversation, outside of just telling everybody what Active Directory is, how it works, how it benefits your business and otherwise, is to address bad actors and how they are using Active Directory to ultimately compromise networks out there. The reason that they use Active Directory is because if you had a choice between chopping a tree down from the branches down or chopping it down from the base up, well, Active Directory is the root of that tree, okay? So if I have a choice as a bad actor, as a cyber criminal, I'm not going to go to the individual workstations. That might be a way to compromise the network. But if I'm able to get in through those, hypothetically, ultimately my goal is get to Active Directory or the domain and start chopping at that. Because once I get to that, that's going to take the entire tree down and it's going to do it in a lot more efficient way. So how do they typically, what are the threats to Active Directory and what are the ways that this is being compromised overall? Well, excuse me. Default security settings, okay? Organizations, a lot of times when they set up a domain controller and put an Active Directory, they just leave the security settings at the default level. And as a result, bad actors are very familiar with what these default security settings are, and more specifically, how to manipulate and maneuver their way around these default security settings. So anytime you're putting in place a domain controller in your Active Directory services, you want to make sure that you are getting away from the default security settings and applying security settings that are specific to the organization where you are putting in place the Active Directory services. In addition, and this is probably the biggest one, guys, that I see whenever I'm out there doing network assessments, is inappropriate administrative users and privileged access, okay? This is a situation where I have gone into organizations and they have made everybody in the organization a domain admin. Now, the user may not know that this is the case and what kind of power they might hold if they were to go in and access the server and start making changes. But at the end of the day, if those users are set up as, we'll call them super users or domain admins, or have that level of credential that can access and make changes to the environment, if one of those bad actors is able to compromise that individual, well, that is going to be a major problem for the organization and going to allow them to go in, make changes, make alterations, and ultimately compromise the network in a negative way, okay? In addition, inappropriate or broad access for roles or employees. So again, making sure that these individuals are grouped into their respective roles within the organization. What I mean by that is that most organizations will have a domain admin and that'll be it. And you might have that for one or two users, and those are users like your IT person or otherwise. A lot of cases, if it's the same person, you want to have an admin account for them and just a general user account for them. You don't want to have them logging in as a domain admin unless they're doing it to address the domain for some reason, make changes to configuration, things along those lines. So bottom line is you want to make sure that each individual has a unique logon, username and password, and more specifically, make sure that when you grant them access, that they have access that they require, not giving them that super user, if you will, or that full admin access that allows them to make changes within Active Directory and ultimately within the domain. In addition to that, passwords that are not complex. Okay, we always, and if you were on my call last month and on the webinar that we did where we covered best practices around cybersecurity, you know what a complex password is. Okay, complex password is typically going to be about 16 characters long. It's going to include usually a capital letter. It's going to include a symbol and usually a number. And the way that I always tell folks to be able to address that is that if they don't want to just use some automatically generated password through some sort of a password tool or repository they might be using, is to use things like a full sentence that could be a movie lyric, could be a song lyric, could be an affirmation statement, whatever you want it to be. But in so doing, start off with a capital letter, spaces in between each word like a normal sentence, punctuated on the end, and then in the middle there somewhere when you find an E or something like that, maybe make it a 3. And that's going to help you to accomplish a complex password. But just make sure if you are a domain admin that you are using a complex password and you're not just going with something like admin1, password1, ABC123, or some simplistic methodology to access it. It may seem simple on the surface, which it is, but obviously I can create some serious headaches and problems on the back end as it relates to bad actors and being able to compromise that network overall. Unpatched vulnerabilities on the Active Directory server. So again, this comes back to ensuring that you're also always applying the most current security patches and updates as they come down from Microsoft, right? If you're not doing this, that could present a security risk and vulnerability. Now, if we are your IT services provider, which for the vast majority on the call today we handle this for you. So we are pushing all updates and patches that come down from Microsoft. It's typically the second or third Tuesday of the month as they release those to ensure that you have the most current security suite and most secure security patches installed on your servers and systems. But again, if you're not utilizing our services, you want to make sure that you have the most current version of patches and updates coming down from Microsoft. There are some organizations that leverage what's called WSUS, which is Windows Server Update Services, automated service that allows these patches and updates to apply automatically. But I've been in a number of organizations over the years where although that is turned on, there are still patches pending that require the user take action. Could be they have to reboot or restart the server for the patch to take place. It just could be that there's a reason that didn't apply for some reason. But at the end of the day, you want to make sure through the activity log and through what Active Directory is able to tell you that those patches and those potential vulnerabilities are addressed as those security updates are available from Microsoft. All right. And then lack of visibility and reporting of unauthorized access attempts. So I use this example all the time, so forgive me for those that are bored with hearing it, but I got 2 9-year-olds at home that hijack my iPad on a regular basis. And when they do that, they just start punching away like a couple little computer hackers trying to figure out a way to compromise my personal network. All right. After a number of unauthorized attempts, what happens? The iPad locks out. And depending on how many times they tried it, I might not be able to use that thing for 5 to 15 minutes. Okay. That said, you definitely want to have visibility into unauthorized access attempts. And that's where Active Directory can help that because it can see where those changes occur and what is going on within the organization. If somebody is attempting to access things repeatedly, that's going to roll up in the activity logs. Okay, so again, this is another way is that people just don't have visibility into these unauthorized access attempts. And as a result, an organization or an individual continues just to pound away at it until they brute force their way into the network. And again, that's where the issues begin to occur. So how do they compromise Active Directory overall? Initial breach targets, going to be gaps in antivirus and anti-malware deployments, okay? So this is a big one, obviously. If we've got gaps in that area, that's going to potentially allow them to seek a vulnerability within the network or an endpoint or something along those lines that's going to get them into the network. Again, incomplete patching, so ensuring you have the most current security updates and patches coming down from Microsoft. This is a big one. Outdated applications and operating systems. I still talk to folks that are running Windows 7 machines. Those were end of life a year or two ago. As a result, they no longer have any security or update patches being pushed out, and they are a huge risk or vulnerability on your network. And believe it or not, occasionally, because of a legacy system that's out there that folks are using, they have to still run Windows XP. So in that case, if you're still running Windows XP, again, that was end of life a long time ago. We need to go in and isolate that machine off the network to ensure that it cannot be compromised from the outside. Okay. Obviously, misconfiguration, if it's not configured properly, of course, that's going to potentially leave openings, and as a result, a vulnerability or a risk. And then open RDP, remote desktop protocol. This, again, is a way that we see a lot of organizations being compromised is through open ports. So we always want to make sure that our firewalls and everything are as secure as possible, and that we don't have open RDP that allows somebody to remote in from the outside because there was an open port. I've had at least one, if not two, instances that I know of where an organization was compromised through an open port, a ransomware attack occurred, and the end result was, in the case of the one I'm thinking of, they had not put in place a good backup solution. And when that happened, we had to remit payment to the tune of about $25,000 in Bitcoin to the bad actors to get that encryption key to try and get that information back. So again, open RDP, we always want to go through as an organization and make sure we don't have any open ports across our networks. If we do, we're typically going to reach out, or we're just going to close it and make sure that you guys are as safe and secure as you could possibly be. In addition, and we talked a little bit about this earlier, is having users and individuals that are privileged accounts, okay, that have full domain access and are listed as domain admins. The bottom line is you want to make sure that you look at your user groups and that you apply the respective roles, responsibilities, and permissions to those groups as they require it. So again, you're going to have one domain admin, but your management team is going to have a certain level of access. Sales team will have a certain level of access. Operations might have a certain level of access. All of that is controlled through Active Directory, okay? So again, making sure that you are not granting access to everything and that you keep these guys compartmentalized or in their respective buckets within the organization to only give access to those things that they need to have access to, all right? Attractive accounts for credential theft. So again, credential theft attacks are those in which an attacker initially gains privileged access on a computer and a network and then uses it freely, available tooling to extract those credentials from the session or logged in account. So this would be logging into unsecured computer that has a privileged account. So there's nothing there preventing them from doing it. It turns out the user actually has privileged account access. Again, we'll call it domain admin access. Browsing the internet. So now you go over, you're logged in as a domain admin. And for whatever reason, you start getting online. When that happens, if you are compromised while online, that can be a problem. So again, you never want to be online and surfing the internet and browsing online using your domain admin credentials. Again, those are reserved only when you're going out and doing things like assessments, making changes to Active Directory, or making changes to the configuration of the system. Configuring local privileged accounts with the same credentials across all systems. Okay, so again, making everything uniform seems easy on the surface, but that is potentially where you can have some serious problems and make it very attractive for a bad actor to want those credentials to get in. Overpopulation and overuse of those privileged domain accounts, again, we've talked about this earlier, is going to be just overusing and giving too many people access that they really should not have within the organization, and then not managing the security of the domain controller properly. What I mean by that is going in, checking activity logs, seeing what's going on within the domain controller, making changes and applying security updates as needed to address the needs based on what you see happening in Active Directory and for your activity logs and your domain controller overall. So, how do these compromises impact the ability to do business? Well, basically, if they get to Active Directory, they can do anything they want, all right? Once they're in Active Directory, they can start changing all your user configurations, your configurations of server, group policies, permissions, who has access to what, and grant themselves access to anything that they want. And they can sit there in the background for an infinite amount of time, collecting information, and otherwise, if we don't have the proper security protocols and solutions in place to identify and address that. The top 5 concerns that we hear out there for recovering from an Active Directory cyber attack is that we have a process in place to recover, but we haven't tested it, okay? Or we have no process in place whatsoever. We've never even discussed it. So we have no secondary domain controller. We have no backup solution that can work in that capacity. We're pretty much beholden to that one domain controller and Active Directory solution. And if that is compromised, that is going to remove group policies, permissions, and everything else. It's going to mess up the entire network. Everything is going to have to be reconfigured to ensure that everything is secure again. The backups get encrypted or wiped out altogether. Again, this comes back to the importance of having a good image-based backup solution in place to be able to recover quickly from a situation like this were it to occur. So again, if the backups are encrypted because bad actors get in, that's the first thing they want to go after. So what I always tell folks is, A, make sure that you have a backup solution that is not only local, but is also hosted. So it's offsite in the cloud somewhere. So you've got it in 2 locations. In addition to that, make sure you have a backup solution that offers versioning. The reason for this is because if that initial backup is encrypted, well, we can go back 1 version or 2 versions prior to the encryption taking place and restore the entire image from that location. Again, we want to make sure that we are running image-based backups and not file and folder only. And the reason for this is because an image-based backup, in the event of a failure, we can just restore the image with all patches, updates, operating system, and everything else, and we're back up and operational again, typically within a few hours. Conversely, if we're doing a file and folder only backup, in that case, we've now got to go and find the operating system, install it, install all patches and updates that are going to be subject to connectivity, reconfigure, make sure everything is working the way that it should, and then we can restore the files and folders. The difference being a few hours when we have an image-based backup versus maybe a couple of days if we're working off of a file and folder only backup, okay? Another concern, obviously, is being able to recover Active Directory quickly. Again, this illustrates the importance of having a good image-based backup that we can restore from in the event Active Directory is compromised. And the responsibility for who is to deal with this were it to happen. Okay, now again, if you're working with an organization like ours, well, the responsibility falls on us to help you guys to get through this and basically get you back up and operational again. However, if you're not, you need to determine within your organization who is responsible to administer the plan in the event there is an Active Directory failure. Just because you have a plan in place doesn't mean anybody knows what to do with it. It's kind of like, what do they say? If you read a book and never apply it, well, it's just entertainment, okay? So again, this comes back to that. If you do a full disaster recovery plan, never test it, and never assign roles and responsibilities, I'm not going to say it's entertainment, but you may have just wasted a lot of time putting that together, because when it happens, everybody's going to be running around trying to figure out whose responsibility it is to address the issue. So the next question I want to ask before we move on is, now that we know who knows what Active Directory and who it isn't, who has a disaster recovery plan in place for Active Directory? So I just throw a poll out there. We'll give it about 30 seconds to run. You guys could give me, I don't know who's keying in, so I'm not going to divulge any names here, but it looks to me like so far, nobody that we have on the line here has an Active Directory disaster recovery and plan in place. Looks like we're at 100%. So again, that illustrates the importance, I would like to believe, because of the time I spent putting this together, of course, that why we're having this conversation today is that it's something you guys need to be thinking about. And if you're working with an organization like ours, we can assist you guys in better understanding what you need. Holy cow, as I look at this, we do have a few out there that have an Active Directory disaster recovery plan, and that is awesome. So I appreciate the input there and your honesty as well. And again, based on my experience, most of the folks that I'm talking to, that's exactly the situation I'm finding. They really just don't have a plan in place to address it in the event something were to occur. So once we talk in terms of best practices, and we've talked about how these things can be compromised and what can happen and so on, so what are some of the best practices that we can put in place to protect against Active Directory attacks? Well, first off, make sure that all applications and operating systems are up to date on all your patches. I think we kind of beat that one dead. Make sure that you have deployed a good antivirus, anti-malware, anti-spyware solution, and that solution monitors for attempts to remove it, okay? So again, and make sure also that it's not the free version of something out there, and it is being updated on a regular basis with the most current definitions, because your antivirus solution is only as intelligent as what it knows. If it sees something come through and it has not been updated with the most current definitions, it may not know what to do with that, and in turn, it may allow it to pass right through. Again, creation of an incident response plan, ensuring that we know what the plan is, that we test the plan on a regular basis, at least once every 6 months, and in so doing that we have established roles and responsibilities of the individuals in the organization that are ultimately going to serve to administer this plan, okay? As an example for what it's worth, if you're one of our clients that utilizes our Datto backup business continuity and disaster recovery solution, that in and of itself offers an incident response plan, okay? we can create a disaster recovery plan with the Datto product. In addition to that, that solution in of itself serves as a fallback measure in the event your Active Directory services on the server are compromised. We can then leverage the Datto backup solution and put everything in place there. Isolation of legacy systems. We kind of touched on this when we were talking about outdated operating systems earlier. But I know that there are a few on the call today, and I know that based on the organizations that I've partnered with over the years, there are a handful that are running an older application just because that application has been steady Eddie and been in place for years, and it does what it needs to do. But at the end of the day, it can't be upgraded. Maybe the manufacturer or the developer of that application no longer exists, or it was an Access database that was created back in 1995 that works fantastic. But at the end of the day, we can't get any updates on it, and we can only run it on an older system. In that case, we want to make sure that that's on a closed loop network and that network cannot be compromised unless somebody manually goes in and allows an organization like us or otherwise to gain remote access for service purposes. I have a few organizations down towards Farmington, Bloomsdale area, I should say, where they are a manufacturing facility and they are in a fully closed loop network, meaning nobody can get into it from the outside. And if they have an issue, an individual has to come into their facility and grant us remote access from the outside to remote in and resolve issues. Disable your users when they leave your company. I hate to just really harp on that one, but this is the one that I see more often than not, especially if they have remote access. And given with COVID and the pandemic and all the stay-at-home orders and everything else over the last year, this is all the more important. I cannot tell you the countless times we run an assessment, and in so doing, the list of enabled users that have not logged in the last 30 days and should be disabled is longer than the list of enabled users that are currently still employed there. So again, whenever an organization lets go of an employee, whenever that employee leaves, quits, whatever the reason is that they went their separate ways, you need to immediately go in that day or have us as an organization go in that day. If not removing them altogether, at least disabling them so that they cannot access from outside. But again, we would encourage you to remove them altogether unless there's a reason not to. But again, you can just disable them if you want to, but action needs to be taken, and it needs to be taken quickly, especially if they have remote access from, say, a home PC that they were remoting into their workstation with. Because again, if you terminated them, you don't disable them. They go home and they're upset about what happened. They then remote in. And if we've set up our roles and responsibilities incorrectly and they are on the back end a domain admin, whether they knew it or not, they're now able to remote in not only to their desktop and start making changes, stealing files and folders and company information, or deleting the entire thing altogether. But if they have privileged access, now they're able to go in and really do some damage. So again, make sure you disable or remove the user altogether if they part ways with the organization. And then finally, implement a password refresh policy. All right, I would encourage that basically your credentials expire every 3 to 6 months. Now, if you implement multi-factor authentication and single sign-on, again, all of that is typically done through Active Directory as well. But if you do that, these refresh policies become a lot easier to manage. Because I know one of the frustrations that I see out there, and I always hear is, well, Chris, I just really don't want to have to change my password every 3 months or every month or even, a couple times a year. And I can understand why you wouldn't. It becomes a bit of a pain. But if you start implementing single sign-on and multi-factor authentication, the need to constantly refresh those may not be as prevalent, okay, or as needed and as required. For example, within ThrottleNet here, I have not changed my passcode. I don't know, it's probably been 3 or 6 months since I've had to make any changes to it or longer. The difference is, though, is that previously we were using Windows Authenticator. So when I would log in, I get a notification on my mobile device that somebody was trying to access my account, and I can approve or deny. Well, now we're to a point where basically we're a single sign-on. So all I have to do is click to approve, and then once every 6 months or every 3 months or so, I then have to go in and key in my credentials again to ensure that it in fact knows who I am and go through the phone, through the mobile phone process or mobile device process through Authenticator to ensure that I am in fact who I say that I am. So what should be included in an Active Directory recovery plan? First of all, the ability to identify the severity of the problem, impacted users, impacted systems, impacted solutions. What all do we need to be accounting for, and then stack ranking those, okay? What do we need to be looking at, and what are the areas that if they were compromised, that we need to get back up and online as quickly as possible? So identification of the severity of the issue before we then determine how are we going to recover from this, okay? Once we determine how we're going to recover from it, obviously, we put in place our roles and responsibilities. Our incident response plan is in place. We're testing it every 6 months. We're doing everything that we should be. Then we want to perform an initial recovery. So in the case, for example, I always use Datto because they, to us, are the Cadillac of business continuity and disaster recovery solutions. They offer the ability, for you to do a DR failover test. I believe it's once every 6 months or twice a year, okay? Now that needs to be scheduled in advance. You would do that through your VCIO if you're one of our managed services clients. In so doing, what's going to happen is usually they're going to schedule a couple of weeks out, and we will do a full failover, resulting in you guys finding out if the process in place works, and if you're able to fail over to Datto and then fail back over to your local system. Again, making sure that you've got a policy in place and that you're doing that on a regular basis, okay? And we've touched on this, so I'm not going to belabor the point, but again, an image-based backup is key to restoring Active Directory services. If we have an image-based backup in place, all we have to do is restore the image, and we're in good shape. It's not a problem anymore. But if we don't have an image-based backup, and based on the example I provided earlier, we're file and folder-only backup, or we're local-only backup, we are going to have some serious challenges when we go to restore all this, and it's going to extend the time by hours, if not days, before you're back up and operational. So that gives you guys some ideas on what Active Directory is, how it benefits your business, how cyber criminals are using it to ultimately compromise an organization, how you should ultimately categorize your users, how you should apply group policies and permissions to what information they can access and cannot access. And we cover a lot of ground here today, as well as the benefits of an image-based backup and why we should have something like that in place. So hopefully I've given you guys some pretty good insight on what Active Directory is and how it benefits your organization overall. I'm going to take a look here and see if we have any questions. I do not see any in here right now. So as we wrap up here, we'll just give you guys a brief overview of some of the things that we do to address these areas. Again, we talked earlier about Azure Active Directory Sync. Again, we can put in place for those organizations that do not have Active Directory in place now, a hosted Active Directory solution through Microsoft 365. So again, that is a service that we offer as a Microsoft partner. So if anybody wants more information about that, they could always reach out to us or me or your BCIO to get more intel on what exactly that entails, involves, and what the benefits to your organization might be. Again, we've talked a lot about the Datto business continuity and disaster recovery solution. Again, this solution in and of itself can serve as a full disaster recovery solution in addition to providing you with a DR plan, and finally helping you to test that DR plan a couple of times a year to ensure that if anything were to occur, you do have a fallback measure and you have an incident response plan in place to address it. Our managed services offering. Again, our service offering includes the antivirus, anti-malware we talked about, includes us doing all the patches and updates, includes us monitoring, maintaining, and managing the infrastructure and workstations. We essentially serve in that capacity to ensure that those things are always the most current and updated variations and versions that they need to be. And then, of course, finally, firewalls and servers. If we say we do not want a hosted Active Directory solution, we just want something local on our server at this point. Believe it or not, I've been in some organizations that have a server running a server operating system, not in a domained environment. We can make that work for you, okay? So we can come in, create a domained environment, get all your users and workstations tied to that through Active Directory, and get you basically where you need to be as far as policies, permissions, and otherwise are concerned. And then, of course, we sell firewalls. Firewalls are probably one of the single most important aspects of your network and protecting from outside attack. So again, these are the areas that we can assist your organization in addressing things like Active Directory, a failure of Active Directory, and Active Directory being compromised by any bad actors that might be out there trying to do so. So that gives you guys some pretty good insight on Active Directory services, what we do, how we help to address it, and otherwise. Before we wrap up here, I'll see if we have any questions. It does not appear that we do. So at this point, I will just wrap up on this note. If you need us for anything, call us toll free, 866-829-5557. Or, of course, you can visit us online at throttlenet.com. So, in addition, if you want to revisit this later, this webinar will be available on our website at any point in time for you to review. Give us a day or so to get it up there. So, again, you can revisit it if you or any one of your team members want to go through this one more time. So, in closing, I certainly appreciate your time today. I know George appreciates your time today as well. And going forward, I hope you guys are able to enjoy the fantastic weather that we're having right now. I don't know what the heck happened, but it's St. Louis, as they say. If you don't like the weather, wait 5 minutes. This time last week, I think it was sub-zero temperatures, and now we're all out looking to play golf. So I hope you guys get out this weekend and have a good time. Wash your hands, make sure you're safe and clean, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Certainly do appreciate it. Thanks for the opportunity to talk today.